p.m. and we have the presence of a quorum, and this meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been given in the time and manner required by law. Our first item tonight is an information item. Dr. Dupree.
Thank you, Mrs. James. We have two main items tonight. They're both reports and updates. The first item is an update on our technology assessment and the plan we're putting together with Renaissance Learning. Long Pham is kind of overseeing that along with Beth and Ann Howard, our program manager. Long, are you going to kind of do the introduction this evening?
Yes, sir.
All right.
If I may. So I'd like to introduce to you, this is Dr. Andy Burning, and he's with the Renaissance Institute. He has been busy with a lot of interviews and investigation and so on and so forth. So tonight he's going to present to you the findings to date, and then he would like to solicit your input. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to
He's going to need
Burning.
a microphone.
Yes.
Probably a handheld, maybe.
All right. Thank you, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here tonight to listen to this. I have an overview of the assessment that we did for technology. And as Long said, we have two goals tonight: for me to present the strategic goals and then to solicit your input. And so I understand that you've had the materials for a while, so you've done the background, you've seen my bio, I've seen yours, and so I think we can go ahead and just get started with it. In order for us to have a good multimedia experience, I actually made a poster tonight. And so there are several ways that you can look at this to view our progress. We can look at the poster. You have a long 22-page report, and also we have an interactive report that's up online that brings a lot more information into it. And so there's a lot of different ways. But I want to focus on this tonight and then go through my PowerPoint presentation. These are the goals that we are recommending for Fort Bend ISD. So this is the first slide, this is number 18, and this is the final slide. And so I leave it here so that we can keep this as a focus point. And I hope it's a discussion. I hope that you have questions and comments. I love to talk about this stuff, and so, but I want to talk about what you're interested in. And so I'm going to go over the highlights, and I'm going to stop periodically, ask for discussion, or ask your opinion. Is that fair? Okay, thank you. So again, several ways to do this, to look at this. The goal at the end, by mid-February, early March, is to have the full plan up on that website. And so we'll talk more about that in our progress. You saw this, but I do want to repeat that the Institute, we don't sell any products. I'm going to be demonstrating some products tonight, but we're fee-only advisors, much like you have fee-only legal advisors or financial advisors. We're fee-only technology advisors. And our model is insight as a service. And that's the business model that we use. And we don't sell hardware, software. The report is from practitioners. We were all practitioners in the K-12 world or the technology world. And then we utilize the systems approach, so you'll hear I talk about systems tonight. So over the 25 years, we developed a model. We've taken bits and pieces from all the districts that we've been involved with or that we've worked with. So we've developed a model over 25 years. And some of the things that we've seen here will be put into the model as well. So the model is a compilation. The model covers infrastructure. The model covers classroom technology, integration strategies, data systems. The scope of this one was classroom technology and integration strategies. So we're going to focus on that because that was the focus. And so this is what I'd like to do tonight. I'd like to go over our assessment process. Takes just a few minutes. I want to go over some leadership and governance concepts. Sometimes we do this as a training. I understand this is not a training tonight, so I'll go over these pretty rapidly. But there are some concepts I think that are important for you to understand how we came to this conclusion. So I'll point to those, and you'll hear me talk a lot about that. And then we'll talk about why Fort Bend ISD should integrate technology. We'll have a discussion, what technology to integrate. You'll see that the LMS, the Learning Management System, is the backbone of this. So there's a learning management system that's the backbone of this. And I teach a blended model, and I use a learning management system, so I'm actually going to demonstrate that tonight because I think that's the only way you can really understand the power that it brings. Again, I'll be demonstrating Blackboard, but there's many, many other learning management system options out there. Blackboard's the one I use in my teaching. I'll also demonstrate assistive technology and what I mean by that, because that's critical. We'll talk about when to integrate, and then we'll have a discussion, and then how to integrate, and I'll bring a demonstration of an analytics board. So here's our process. We reviewed documents, interviewed key stakeholders. You've probably seen this in the report. We visited a representative sampling of campuses. So tonight we bring it to the board. We bring it to the governance body and say, here's what we recommend as strategic goals and to get your input. We'll then gather input from the community, form some teams to put this in place, and present a final plan to you by mid-February, early March, depending on how the staff wants to do this. So I want to go over some important, what I call governance. I know you're the governance body for this. So I want to talk about a systems approach, and it's critical that these strategies include something that we can do for all the teachers. All the teachers. Because if you're like most districts, and from what we've seen you have 15% of the teachers that are using technology a lot. But our goal with this plan is to get it across the board, and that's critical. So you'll see that we do this. We also have feedback systems to provide real-time analytics. We found that we were kind of blind about the technology use in the district because there really were no dashboards, no feedback analytics to say what technology is being used. And so it really isn't fair for me to do a walkthrough of a campus in an hour and look at all the classrooms and say this is what was happening. So we're kind of blind. So one of our recommendations is some real-time analytics. And so we'll talk about that. And then the awareness of the energy in the system. And I don't mean electricity. I mean, how many things can a district do at one time? How much energy do your teachers have to do these kinds of implementations? Because it's easy to say, it's the easiest thing in the world is for me to say, do this, do this, do this. But I know that there's so much energy in the system, and so I want to talk about that. This is a critical one. There's a million ways we can go with the technology. We recommend that you put in technology to learn with and not from. We're seeing a huge gap, a digital divide of some schools that are using technology to learn from. So they got their kids in front of computers all day. We think that's a bad idea. So we think you should use technology to learn with, and that's a critical distinction for us. Nobody wants their kids on computers all day long, and as a parent, I certainly don't. And so that's a critical distinction. But we see this a lot. We see people trying to keep their kids in front of computers all day. I think there'll be a huge backlash against leadership at some point against all the technology. And also, our strategic goals prepare students for post-secondary life. In the Link Lab where I work at UT Arlington, we study the future of work and the future of learning. And the future of work is quite different. And so what you see in these strategic goals reflects what we think the future of work is and also the future of learning. So we want your children, your students, to leave Fort Bend ISD and go into a university or workplace and feel comfortable with those systems. So that's a big piece of this. I teach a university class, and I know that the students that come in that don't know how to do these things are way behind. They're 3 or 4 steps behind the students that do. So I think that's another critical piece of our strategic goals. And also it's extremely critical that we build these goals into something that within the existing paradigm of curriculum and instruction. Otherwise, it becomes a separate curriculum. Otherwise, it becomes a separate project, and that never works. So we have to make it within the confines of well, confines is not a nice word, but with the paradigm of the existing curriculum and instruction. So that's critical. And I use this phrase a lot, skate to where the puck is going. And by that, I mean, we can talk about what technology is now, but we have to say, where will the technology be by the time we get it in? And I'm telling you, there's this thing called internet time, as you know, that technology is changing so fast, and it's changing much faster than we are. And so we have to merge that. It's like trying to get on a roller coaster that never stops. It's all about timing. And so our strategic goals reflect that also, because you may ask me, well, what about this technology? And I say, well, that's where the puck is now. This is where the puck will be by the time you get there. And that's critical, that we time this right. And this is just a maybe not so funny cartoon about the concept of systemic change versus gadgets. A tremendous amount of technology in schools is based on teacher gadgets or gadgets to put in, and they end up being in the fossil layer of educational technology. It happened where I worked, probably happened here, and so we want to avoid that. The standards we use, Texas has some very distinct standards for technology integration. National Education Technology Plan, very good. Excuse me, international standards from FBISD, very good. And I'm working on a White House project now, the Connect Ed initiative, and we are using the Future Ready Schools framework for that initiative. And so that's also very good. So the strategic goals that we set include all those things. So let me go over the goals, and we'll go over them again. This is actually slide 18, and we'll get there in a moment, but just so that we can focus, we recommend you complete the network infrastructure. And that really wasn't part of the scope of this, and I know Jojo and Long have this under control, but we did take a look at it because that's critical. You can't do any of the things we're talking about unless you finish that infrastructure. If you tried to put these goals in now without this infrastructure, it wouldn't work. You would fail. And so it's critical that you complete that. And we've had long conversations about what the vision is. You had a network infrastructure audit done earlier. Part of the requirement was formalize a technology integration framework. And so I'll talk a lot about the framework that we recommend. There's a dozen of them out there that are being used across the state. SAMR, TPAC, all those. We'll recommend one. We're recommending a bring your own device and technology lending library. We'll talk about that. As you know, some schools, I believe in one-to-one, just not district provided one-to-one. So there's a lot of options that you can do, and I'll be happy to have that discussion as well. We recommend a bring your own device and backfilled with a technology lending library where a child can check out a computer like they check out a book from the library. I've done that for 15 years, and it works. And it works at about 1/20th of the cost to the district. And I always say no one washes a rental car. You know, kids take better care of their own technology. So and I have a list of things we can talk about with BYOD. And then blended learning, we'll talk about blended learning as an instructional model. We've talked about that. There's some really good models going. I teach a blended learning class. I'll talk a little bit about that when I do this. Implement a learning management system. Again, that's critical. Ensure all students, staff, and parents are trained. You really want parental support. The LMS is the way to get it because they see what their student sees. And so the feedback from districts where the LMS is in and the parents are using it is very positive. And then implement the analytics we talked about. Because we've made some recommendation for classroom technology for a number of, 10 laptops, but we don't know. Nobody knows. And that's the thing. We have to have some dashboards in place to say how many laptops are being used every day. Where are they being used? And we stay on this side of being Big Brother because we don't know what they're doing exactly or those kinds of things, but we have to know. And the tools are there. The tools are very good, and I'll demonstrate some of those tools tonight. Why integrate technology? I wanted to bring in this to your, again, I don't want a separate curriculum, into your goals. You have some great goals online, and so this slide just demonstrates that technology doesn't replace anything, but it brings a new dimension. And that's a key, that's key. We're not trying to replace the teacher. We're not trying to replace the administrators. We're not trying to replace anything. Technology just brings a new dimension to things. And it can bring a new dimension to the goals that you set out for this district. And it's critical that we should provide flexible learning opportunities. I think that's the byproduct of these strategic goals in other districts is that students have flexibility. They want to accelerate, they can. They need more information, they can. And you have a nice platform to do that. And then it's also part of a good disaster recovery business continuity plan. We always say, you know, what happens, God forbid, if someone has to leave if you can't get into that campus? So I know you have a disaster recovery plan for if you can't get into the building or if things go down. There's also a learning continuity plan that unfortunately has had to been used many places. So this is a plan where students can still learn if they can't get to the campus. And then increased efficiency. Why technology integrations fail? Too much focus on, and I've seen a lot, we study all the time what those that didn't go well. And by the way, we saw lots of good things out in your campuses. By the way, I may not focus a lot on that tonight, but we saw lots of good things going on the campuses. But why do most fail? And I've traveled in China and we've traveled in Europe to see how things are going. Too much focus on teacher gadgets is the biggest thing. Let's buy this, let's buy this. Ill-considered replace the teacher strategy. In other words, we are often asked, can we replace the teacher? No, that's not what we're about. Lack of planning, that happens. Too much focus on computerizing the status quo, too much hype, too little focus, and technology is treated as a separate curriculum, insufficient training, and insufficient technical support. So in the document that you have, we've made some recommendations for training and the amount of support. There's two types of support. So there's break-fix support, those people that fix the machines, but there's also integration support. And this will not happen, the strategic goals will not happen if you don't have both types of that support in the campuses. And that's a critical piece as well. You've probably all seen the technology hype cycle, but the hype cycle is really, all technology goes through the hype cycle. It starts here, it's a trigger, goes to the peak of inflated expectation, the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and the plateau of productivity. I bet you've all seen this in your personal technology as well. The bad news is sometimes schools buy up here at the peak of inflated expectations. And that's how we get the fossil layer of unused technology in the background. By the time it goes into the trough of disillusionment, we don't use it. The sweet spot is right here in the slope of enlightenment, which means finally this technology is important. Finally, this technology brings us some value. And so the technology that we recommend is not necessarily the peak of inflated expectations, but it is in the plateau of productivity. I talk a lot about the gap, and so a lot of our goals are to fill the gap. This is critical. So there's a chasm, there's a huge gap in all districts between the innovators, part of the early adopters, and this is where I call them the 15 percenters. Typically there's 15% of teachers in every campus or every district that are really using technology well. Whether I'm here, whether you're here, they just use it. The trouble is, the strategies, there are very few strategies to get across this chasm to get all of them using it. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. We're trying to say, no matter what, these 15 percenters are going to use technology. They always will, they always have. And that's everywhere, by the way. That's internationally, we see that. So part of the gap is we have here where we're here's where we are now, kind of computerizing the status quo pretty early in Fort Bend ISD on integrating technology. This is where we want to be. A board member summed this up well for me one time. He said, I want it to be like Iron Man. Have you seen Iron Man? With Tony just throwing stuff out and doing stuff? He said, I want it to be like Iron Man. And Iron Man's not real. And so that's the problem, that we're missing expectations a lot of times with our staff. And so the strategic goals we have tonight, flexible learning opportunities, virtual campus, universal access, it's like a stepping stone to get us there. Because we will be there, we will be at Ironman at some point, but quite honestly, none of the systems are in place. You don't have systems in place here to get anywhere near Ironman, and no one does. So a lot about our strategic goal is just a stepping stone. Why don't teachers use technology? We surveyed your teachers. I think we got about a little over 1,400 surveys back, and this is my word, FBISD, but typically teachers don't use technology because of fear, uncertainty, doubt, or indifference. And the survey instrument that we use is really a FBISD finder, if you will. And it was interesting in Fort Bend in that 90% of your teachers knew the value of mobile technology. And by the way, it's all about mobile technology. It's all about the mobile learner. They knew the value, they knew it's right, but there was a long list of reasons they did not want mobile technology in their classroom. Almost all of them back to this. Insufficient Wi-Fi, not enough support, just the distraction, the cheating. And so some of our strategic goals take into consideration how to get over the FBISD as well. But it takes training. I mean, these strategic goals, it's a very long game. This is a 3 to 5 year game that we're playing to do this, and I think you would fail if you try to push it any faster than that. Number one, I'm pointing to JoJo. He's getting the Wi-Fi in as fast as he can, as fast as they can, but you really can't do this. You're going to have to follow the Wi-Fi installation, and your new campus is coming online, right, to do this. You have some new campuses, the one in the fall, great campus as far as technology. So, but the other campuses, you can't do these things. So you're going to have to follow the Wi-Fi upgrade. Survey feedback, talk a little bit about that. Again, the teachers are very positive. The teachers were very positive about the leadership. They were very positive about the support they got. They just felt that mobile technology would be a distraction for them. And so if you tried to put mobile technology in now, you would fail. Because the 15%ers would do well. They would embrace it. They want it. They want more technology. The rest are saying it's a distraction, kids are cheating, all kinds of things. So we have the training that we recommend will get over some of this. So I want to stop for a second, take a breath, and ask you from a governance perspective, how can you avoid technology failure? What can you do to help avoid all the things we've just talked about?
Mr. Rosenthal.
Well, I think we need to learn from the past, and most of us know what I'm talking about. And I think you need to take those small steps, kind of like you were, insinuating there, rather than jump right in.
That's right.
You need to make sure that things have been tested or vetted. You had a different term up there. And I think that's one of the ways to prevent it.
You're right.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Well, in order to answer that question, what can we do from a governance perspective? I would ask you some questions such as, how are we going to repair hardware on campus? We have a hardware glitch, and we've got bring your own device. Some of our kids can do it, and some of our kids can't. So we're going to need to provide some of those.
Mm-hmm.
How do we provide a help desk on each campus? Not just for the kids, but for the teachers too.
Right.
Because we need that. How do we recharge laptops if the students forget to charge it up, if we're talking about laptops? How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to use part of our instructional allotment to pay for these? We use bond money for Wi-Fi and infrastructure, and instructional allotment for computers that, they're good for maybe 4 years, and then we should just send them home with the kids. How do we obtain the real-time analytics that you were talking about to make sure that we are using that? Let's see. I did have another question that kind of goes beyond that, because I'm listening to you, I understand everything you're saying, and I agree with you. If we're going to use this and not just as a gimmick, but to leverage the productivity and realize productivity gains and realize that children are already using, those that have laptops and iPads, they're already using it, smartphones, to obtain information. It can not replace the teacher, but augment their learning. We have to support it when they're here. We have to be able to support that. And so, you know, I'd like to know if that means we're building new schools, if we've got to have a room that's staffed by people who can repair hardware, and also another room that is staffed by a help desk person that can, to me, the key is to respond to these requests for help in a timely manner. I do that at work. You know, we use all this stuff, and my computer locks up and does crazy things. I don't know why, and I've got to get somebody to help me unstick it. And I'd like to know, when you're talking about awareness of energy or capacity, where you were talking about awareness of energy, were you really talking about the capacity of the staff, the teachers and staff, to embrace this technology and get it implemented, and not too much too soon?
That's right.
Okay. Well, so if we know the questions, the answers to those questions, then I think we can help, from a governance perspective, prevent technology integration failure.
Good. So it seems like those questions revolved around support, the analytics, and paying for it. And I think we'll cover that as we go. Would you like me to talk about that now, or just cover it as we go through? What's your preference?
Well, if you're going to talk about those things as you go along, then I think that's
Okay.
I think that's fine. I think he's just raising things that came to his mind as we went through this first
And
section.
those are great questions. And this, by the way, is the reason I'm not recommending a one-to-one for you, because we've seen you have to triple your support staff in order to do a one-to-one. If you don't, you fail. And so the BYOD is much better. The lending library, the perfect model we've seen is really using the librarians in the library. I mean, you've got some really great libraries, and these just lend themselves so well to what we call an ICU, you know, an iPad care unit or a laptop care unit. So we'll talk about those models as we go through. And how do districts, obviously you'll have to think about your own funding strategies, but some districts are using their IMA, their instructional material allotment, and they're buying, we'll talk about open educational resources, OER content, free textbooks. Rice University in your own backyard has some great textbooks that are free, they're open source. And so some districts are using those funding models. Some districts are using, you know, local funds, bond funds. As you know, those are typically the way that they're funding it. But support is the big deal. Support in the energy in the system. And I think we'll talk about that as we go through. I'm sorry, ma'am, did you have a question?
Did you say some districts are using bond funds to purchase short-term technology?
Some districts do use bond funds, 5-year bonds for technology, 30-year bonds for, I'm not a bond attorney, but 30-year bonds for the stuff in the walls, wires and cables and things, and short-term bond for computers.
I guess generally that would give me pause.
I agree.
And along those lines, what I was thinking is that I think we have to be careful that what we invest in is going to give us some longevity, because, you know, technology or hardware especially turns over pretty rapidly, as Mr. Rice was saying. So I think from a governance perspective, I would want to make sure that whatever we're investing in has as long a life as we can possibly make it. And what is our strategy for extending that? And what is our strategy for upgrading the hardware that we have versus investing in new hardware? And what I think as a trustee, I would want to make sure that we're not doing anything to overwhelm our teachers in the classroom because they're already, they already have to teach a lot of
Yes.
TEKS and a lot of, there's testing and all of this. So we really need technology integration that's going to help them and not overburden them or overwhelm
Right.
them as they're trying to transition into it. So that's what I would really want to think about.
Good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. One thing come to my mind is, actually, you mentioned about that 85% of the teachers. End of the day, I think we could put the best system, best everything. If there is no human touch to it, it's going to fail in your word. So, what is your idea to bring that 85% on board and explaining to them this is the future, this is important? Because if you really think about it, if we don't train our teachers, some of these teachers are hesitant to, use for various reasons, take full advantage of technology, and that's affecting our children. They're not getting full advantage of. We are investing
Right.
the money, but they're not getting the full advantage of. And you said there is a lot of children are not proficient when they get out of high school, 100% when it comes to the technology and stuff. That is the future,
It is.
we all know that. So what are your plans to bring these teachers, explaining to them and making them understand this is important?
Good. I'll talk about the BHI training model later, and if I don't cover that well, please bring that back.
Ms. Hellinger has a question.
Hi. Definitely agree with all the comments that have been made, especially that of Mr. Rice. For me, I'm looking at the infrastructure, not just the hardware, but the software that's going to have to be put on it, licensing, as well as, what are my little notes here? I was kind of concerned with the standards, like, whether these standards, who blessed these standards in a sense, that kind of thing, that makes it seem that we have to use those standards. I know Texas has the Texas loans, I forget what it was called.
Yes.
But what are these standards, who's using these standards, that kind of thing?
Yes.
And how beneficial have they been by using these standards? I think I want a little bit more information on that.
Okay.
As well as, anytime when you introduce new technology like this, I think it's important for us to use some type of proof of concept or pilot
Yes.
when doing that. And then I think that one of the questions that someone had was, when it comes to, the kids cheating and those kinds of things, what about a type of managed workstation?
Good. Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but definitely a more managed
I am.
workstation that when you get onto our system and our internet, there are certain things when it comes to you being as a student, you're allowed to do these kinds of things, where when you're a administrator, you're allowed to do those kind of things, a more managed workstation approach, so that way you can kind of monitor and manage the type of things that are being
Okay.
done on those devices. I have a few others, but, those are the main ones that I see, because I've done something very similar to this, and those are the things that I know are very important for us to make sure that we're not spending thousands or millions of dollars on
Right.
technology, and then we find out, hey, this doesn't work for us, this doesn't meet our needs. So that's why it's important for me that we see in the roadmap more of a timeline, time frame after you get it all together is, we have a pilot. What are the results of the pilot?
Right. Right. And when you say manage, you mean from a technical infrastructure level, or I'm going to demonstrate some role-based authentication in an LMS, and you're probably familiar with that. So we can talk about that as far as how to keep the different roles, whether you're a student, a teacher, or a staff member. We've talked a lot about virtual desktop VDI implementation. Those work great in corporate. They really don't work well in schools. We've seen some very miserable implementations of VDI in the schools, because schools still do so many different things. And schools want that USB port. They want that printer, and they have, if you work if you have Walmart or some corporate that's doing one thing or two things a lot, Those work really well. We haven't seen a great, and the VDI vendors will probably be angry with me, but we haven't seen a great VDI implementation in the school districts. So we go back to the standard role-based authentication, role-based security, and be happy to cover more about that.
And one last comment, because I will have to leave shortly. But
okay.
when it comes to using Blackboard and digital learning, I think
Right.
is one of them, just to the rest of my board members, I feel like it's a very important thing for us to look into our students using, because no matter what type of school that they go to, or a community college, or four-year college, or even in some of our trade schools, they have to utilize that. And I have seen it personally in class where students don't know how to manage or navigate through that process, and it takes them almost a whole semester to figure it out.
That's true.
So one of our, it's almost a fundamental class almost that's needed. So just a comment to the rest of our board members.
So I agree with all my colleagues and the things that they've said, and I'd add one more thing that's important from the governance perspective, and that is the clear expectation of the timeline for implementation, and a little bit, as Mrs. Tossan was saying, costs and timeline of costs, but implementation timeline, pilot, these types of things, and what's realistic. You also just used the term VDI. I'm not familiar with that acronym.
So VDI is virtual desktop infrastructure. So instead of, you've probably seen them at Walmart or other places, instead of a computer on the person's desk, they have it's almost way back to the dumb terminal, if you will. And so all the work and all the security is done in a central place, and then you just put a dumb terminal, or it's just a monitor with a keyboard out for the teacher. And that works really well in large corporate environments. It's very successful. We haven't seen it work well, mainly because of the support system. It takes a lot of very unique skill sets on your support staff to use VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. And I think that's one reason, and also that you can't lock down many things for teachers. They want to use USBs, and they want to use all these things. And we may see a VDI. The promise of VDI is that it's cheaper. You're putting a $100 device on the desktop instead of a $500 device on the desktop. The trouble is there's a lot of money in the back end, and so it doesn't balance out. The cost-benefit ratio hasn't worked well in our experience.
Thank you for explaining that.
Any other comments or questions? These are great questions, and I think we'll answer them as we go through the rest of the evening. If not, please stop me. The strategic goals, again, this is slide 18. This is the poster. So I want to say a bit about network infrastructure and answer your questions before you have to leave. We have to focus on Wi-Fi. The mistakes that schools make is putting in Wi-Fi maybe like you have at your house. And it's really, and as these guys know this, you really need not only to consider how much Wi-Fi, but how many simultaneous connections you have. And so if kids are carrying an iPhone that, and it grabs the Wi-Fi, and you have some personal devices that grabs the Wi-Fi, we've seen that sometimes there's 75 devices in a classroom competing for that access point. So in the early days, the mistake a lot of us made was putting an access point, like there's an access point up on the wall there, one per every 4 classrooms or something. And pretty soon, they got overpowered. So we've talked a lot about capacity. You've heard the concept probably the Internet of Everything. As our refrigerators get online, as our projectors are online, everything is connected. They're all going to compete for that Wi-Fi. So whatever you think we need, double it. That's a good engineering rule of thumb, and I know that these guys are doing that. The other mistake we make for infrastructure is that we make it too hard for the students to get on. You have to go through several layers of authentication, and we want that because we want to keep control, and we want to keep everyone safe. But that tends to tank the process. So we have to make it easy, like easy as a hotel or a university or any place where you can just, if you're there and you've got a Wi-Fi device, you can get on. And it's safe and secure, and it's filtered. Because if it don't, they'll use their 4G connections, and they'll go around every filter and firewall you have, they being the students. So we need to make it nice and robust and fast and easy. Framework for technology use. The question sometimes come up in that first section is, what are other schools using technology for? What's the role of technology? And I'm going to go through a few examples of what others think and then ask you your opinion of what's the role of technology in the classroom in Fort Bend ISD. So some people say to promote a modern workplace, engagement, enrichment. Engagement's a big one. Self-confidence, a tool for efficiency and effectiveness, knowledge creation, data management. It's a huge list to develop 21st century skills, inform citizens, better behavior, on and on and on. There's a lot of good, these are all good reasons to use technology in the classroom. But if we're going to technology integration framework, we have to decide what is the role of technology, because you can't do everything. And so what really is the role of technology in Fort Bend ISD, in your opinion? And I always say, do no harm. There's a lot of research coming out now on the digital divide and when not to use technology. You know, I'm so glad the humanists are finally getting into this business and saying, you know, this teaching is a very human endeavor. So we really need to understand the human side of technology integration as well. There's a backlash, as you probably are reading, against too much screen time, especially for younger children. And again, this concept is so important of learning with technology instead of from. We are not advocating you put every kid in front of a computer all day long. That's a bad idea. So, but technology is critical for what we do want to use it for. So what is the role of technology in Fort Bend ISD?
Thoughts? Anybody?
I'll go first.
Mrs. Tossan?
So I think for me, my perspective would be, because I have 3 children in all 3 different levels in
Right.
Fort Bend ISD. I would agree that I wouldn't want my 4th grader in front of a screen very much. She taught herself PowerPoint, but she doesn't have a phone, you know, so there are reasons for that. So I think really it's because we have to prepare students for the world that we live in, and the world that we live in is technology driven. And so for me, the goal would be to get them to the point where, like Addie was saying earlier, to get them to the point where they can leave Fort Bend ISD and go into, whether it's career, college, community college. They know how to use their device and whatever it is that they plan to do in their job, in school. I mean, it's a tool. It's a tool to access information. It's a tool to make things a little bit easier. It's a tool to help them, you know, in their careers and their learning. And I think for me, that would probably be what I would see as the primary goal. One of the things that's a pet peeve of mine is my 4th grader doesn't really have dictionary skills, because she can Google any word she wants and the definition comes up. So I constantly say, go get the dictionary. Stop Googling it on the iPad, because she's not learning how to look up in a book, you know, referenced, in a glossary or in a, you know. So I want our kids to still get that type of learning. I think it's important. I think it's what it opens the doors to a lot of things we don't even think about.
Right.
If all they ever have to do is Google it, then they don't know how to find information sometimes. You gotta Google the right thing too, if you're gonna research something. And I can tell you, as a lawyer, I see a lot of young lawyers that don't know how to research because they don't know the right thing to look up.
It's a skill, that's right.
It's a skill, and I don't want our kids to lose that skill in the midst of the technology. But at the same time, I think it's critically important that we show them how to use it in the best way so that they can they can get from it what they need when they go out into the workforce and into college.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, I kind of see it as a way to really maybe enhance learning. Using it as something that can teach or allow kids to explore advanced concepts. So not just everyday stuff, so they're on the computer just doing regular science or regular, but when they get to a point where you can use technology to maybe explore, to show something that's really hard to pick up from just looking at a picture, you know, things like that, or demonstrations.
Right.
To me, that's really the advantage of the technology, you know.
Agreed. Very good, thank you.
Mr. Rice?
Well, I would like, that's a pretty big question. What is the role of technology in Fort Bend ISD? And that's something that really the administration needs to give us some information on, because we've had some attempts to do it in the past. So I would say what I want students to learn is how to access a file server. So to Mrs. Tasson's point, if young people go, sometimes I have interns that come to work for me, and in the past you could take them to a filing cabinet and show them how things are filed. But now many things are filed on the file server. So they need to learn and understand how file server structure follows logic, follows a pattern, how they can access that, how they can open up Word templates to create letters and then save them correctly. Those are practical skills that they'll use when they're at work. Also, the correct use of email. We used to teach cursive and how to write a letter. I was taught in elementary school how to compose and write a letter, how to address it. And so I think that is something that all of our students could understand. I think if they could learn the correct use of social media,
Yes.
so they don't go off, get themselves in trouble.
Yes.
It's one other thing I was going to tell you. Oh, one thing that I have noticed from young people today, at least, 20-somethings, coming into the workplace, they over-rely on email. Even when they're sitting right next to each other, they'd rather email each other than talk to each other. So we got to understand there's a use for email, but it's not a complete substitute for a face-to-face conversation or calling someone on the telephone. And I think because of email and social media websites, young people have lost the ability to actually talk to one another, or maybe they haven't lost it, but it seems like they have. And knowing how to talk to someone and work out issues and problems, knowing how to do that in a positive way,
Right.
not a negative way. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Good feedback, thank you.
Ms. Hellier?
Yes, thank you. I think we have to be conscious of not contradicting ourselves with what we want from our students when it comes to technology and what we do in the classroom. I think this is a direct correlation with our curriculum, because we've got classrooms who do not administer school books, and they're required to download worksheets, download the passages that they're reading in English from online. So, I understand we want use of technology. We just need to make sure that it's following along with what we want with a curriculum, and that we're not contradicting, that we want one thing, but then we deliver something totally different. So that's important to me. So that's it.
Thank you.
Mr. George?
To me, I think it's already been said. You just mentioned a sentence, learning with technology, which is, I think, it's a advanced tool, can be used for good purposes, like Mr. Rice was saying. But at the same time, we don't want to let or teach our children, or you just learn technology and everything else will take care of. And I see that habit among young people, email communication they use for everything, and I 100% agree with Mr. Rice on that. And because they avoid that conversation, like that,
Yeah.
that personal touch, and we don't want, I think we don't want to send that message. So to me, it is absolutely learning with the technology and also a tool which can enhance their learning ability to prepare them for the next step.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the two words that come to my mind that when you talk about technology in all of Fort Bend ISD, that infers a little bit more than just the classroom. And I guess I would say there's two reasons you might use technology. One is as a resource for something that you don't know or need to find out about. Like I might use a help feature for a program or something like that. Another reason you might, I might Google a word if I didn't know what it meant, or I might use dictionary.com. But I think another role of technology is a little bit of efficiency.
Yes.
In the availability. I heard you talk about an availability of a large amount of data, large amount of information. I think that's a thing that our students and our teachers and all of us struggle with. There's so much information, there's so much data. We want to have it available to us and use it as a resource. And what's the most efficient way to do it? It's with our smartphones or our iPads. And so management of that is kind of what I think one of the roles of technology in Fort Bend ISD is.
Good. My next slide is where I think the puck is going on the role of technology. And someone asked earlier, well, how do you know that? Well, there's a lot of things that point to this, and I'll explain. But here's the framework that I'm proposing for technology. And this is a very simple framework. And you need a framework because we have to have common language. We have to be able to objectively analyze it, give some real-time dashboards on this. I think the role of technology, and you've said all of these things, by the way, is to connect the learner. I'll expand on that. Promote literacy, traditional literacy, but also 21st century skills literacy, and level the playing field for equitable access for all learners. So this is the big slide as far as the three things that we see technology does really well. There's a lot of things technology does not do well. Computerizing the status quo is a bad idea. But what we've seen, these are three things that technology does very well, and teachers do it naturally. Students do it naturally. And so, again, we have a focus on mobile learning and cloud computing because it's all mobile learning. It's all about mobile learning and cloud computing. That's the biggest rock we can put in right now. So let me expand on these three and then demonstrate a couple of tools. So connect the learner. We're talking about connecting the learner to district-approved content, to applications that promote engagement, personal learning networks. We're studying the networks a lot. The network, I bet you have a personal learning network, whether it's informal or formal, that you use to monitor and learn from. Some maybe it's face-to-face, but I'll bet you all have a personal learning network. Informal learning networks, opportunities for acceleration, cultural opportunities, creative opportunities, and publishing opportunities. So let me demonstrate the learning management system. So I want to demonstrate a learning management system and how it relates to this role of connecting the learner. Can you hear me with this? Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna pop out of here for a second. And again, we don't sell anything. This is a learning management system. I teach a blended course. Again, these are college students, of course, but there are districts doing this exact thing everywhere. So this is a learning management system. When a child or a student logs in, you know, I have a focus video, I have some pre-work they have to do before they come in, I have a narrated PowerPoint presentation, some interviews with experts and some people. But let me show you the power of a learning management system. And almost all of them, and I've given you 4 or 5, I think, in my documents that work, but they all have similar capabilities. So let's say this is a blank slate. This is the critical piece of a learning management system as opposed to buying a curriculum system. This is a learning management system, the backbone of our recommendation. So let's say I want to build content. I can put in an item, which is just some words. I can put in a file. I can put in an audio file. And these systems mash up really well with all the social media tools. So if you have something up on YouTube or Vimeo or any of these, they mash up. You don't have to take the file and push it back up. You can use embed codes and links to do this. This is a powerful tool. It makes it very easy for the teachers to do things. You can put in a web link. You can put in a learning module, and you can use this for lesson planning. Again, it mashes up all with the YouTubes, Kaltura, Vimeo, and all of those things. So you can put in any content you want. And it's been my experience, I forget, Mr. Rice, maybe you talked about training. It's been my experience that it takes the average teacher only a few hours to learn these systems because it's really a point and click development. And going back to the training question, I've yet to see a teacher that can't do this. I've yet to see anyone that can't do this. So this is critical. As far as assessment, you asked about cheating. So I can put in a test. I can make a multiple choice test. I can do a survey. I can do an assignment. And let me just demonstrate maybe putting in an assignment here. Let's say I use a lot of assignments where I want the students to just type something or upload a Word, PowerPoint, or a Word file. And so I can type the directions. But here's the powerful thing with these learning management systems. I can run all these things through plagiarism tools. This one uses SafeAssign. There's many others. So in other words, when any student puts their assignment in here and submits it, it compares that assignment to all the web. I know that sounds crazy, but it does. And it gives me, the instructor, a SafeAssign originality report, which says, yeah, 100% of this came from Wikipedia, or 5% came from this, and so it compares it against the web, and it compares it against all the other assignments that have been handed in at that school. This is a powerful, powerful anti-plagiarism tool. And once students know this, I mean, you can't get around it. You can't hide from these tools. And so I wanted to demonstrate that because one of your questions was about cheating. And then the powerful thing about grading on these systems, I'm going to go to my grade center here, and I've asked permission from one of my students to use her work. Let's see. So once students either put in the multiple choice or they submit their test, it's immediately in my box. And I can look at it, and I can use my highlighting tool and highlight it. I can make little remarks on it, and I hit submit, and it's already in the grade book, and the student can see it right away. So there's always this issue of teachers are very concerned about, having to carry papers and then get onto another system, and you really don't have to do that. Again, this is a system. These are very good systems. They all have the same features, essentially. All the 4 or 5 that I've mentioned have the same features. And there's a course calendar. You can put up the syllabus, and these course calendars can roll up into the campus calendar. And there's also all the social media tools. Someone asked, maybe Mr. Rosenthal, you asked about social media. These have, in my opinion, safe social media tools where they can get the experience with social media without getting way out. Because as you know, COPPA rules and others, students 13 and under shouldn't be giving personal information anyway. I don't think any kid should be giving personal information on the web. But there are tools in there. So, for example, this one has built-in wikis, built-in discussion boards, built-in everything. You can go and you can self-select into groups to work together on these tools. So I wanted to give you a quick demonstration of a learning management system and how it's so powerful. You have all the tools in there. One of your questions was about software. What software should we have? And kind of the beautiful thing about putting in a learning management system is that all these tools are built in. And so you have a single sign-on to the point of security. We talked a little bit about security. I promise to answer that question. And so when a student logs in, they have the security that's been afforded them by a security administrator. And they can't do anything more and they can't do anything less. And the one thing I put in the report is you want to make sure that your learning management system interfaces well with your student information system, so that when your 3 children log in, they only see their teacher's work, right? Or when you log in, you can see all your students' work.
So can I ask a question right
Please.
here? Okay, so you just hit on one of my questions.
Okay.
Because we have several things going on in our schools. We've got Skyward, which
Right.
is like our student information system.
Right.
We've got teachers that use Edmodo. We've got
Right.
teachers that use Weebly.
Right.
We've got teachers that only use Skyward. So I guess 2 questions, and I don't know if they can be answered now, or maybe this is just something we need to be thinking about as a board. Are we gonna change all of that, and it's only gonna be one system that goes through our website, and everybody's gotta use that, and all the teachers have to buy in? Because I'm gonna tell you right now, it is mind-boggling the number of websites we have to go to in order to get the worksheet and the assignment, and then you have to do this, and then you
Right.
have to upload that, and it puts the responsibility on the parent to have a working internet, working computer, working printer, paper, ink, and whatever it is that we have to have. And I'll tell you, we're pretty responsible parents, and there are times when we just don't have everything jiving for our kids to be able to print out what they need. PowerPoint's not cooperating, internet's shut down.
Right.
So a little bit of concern around some of that.
We heard that loud and clear, and let me take a stab at a general answer to this. So your student information system, which is Skyward, that stays. I mean, you have to have a student, that's your bread and butter for counting kids and grading and all those things. The good LMSs, the ones that I've recommended, interface well with that. And so all the other things that you mentioned, the Weebly's, the Edmodos, the Google Classrooms, and all those things, the LMS replaces all those. So you as a parent have that single login as well to log into. And we heard that loud and clear when we talked to your VIPs and your PTO members here. So, I mean, that's the answer.
So I'd like to add one more thing to that, is that's our, the reason why we moved towards SchoolWires, to have a unified interface on the web for the whole entire campus, and have the same look, same feel for the classroom. And eventually what we want to do is, once they get into the classroom, then they go into the LMS. And that LMS will integrate with the student information system, such as Skyward. So there will be one entry point.
And all of their teachers' information will be there for them to access, I
That's
assume.
what we would like to move
So my
forward.
only other concern, and I think that's great, that's, for in the classroom, that would certainly help. And even at home, that would certainly help us, because right now, it really is very confusing and very difficult to manage. But I'm still really concerned about kids that don't have internet, kids that don't have working computers. And when they get home, I mean, we're uploading stuff, we're doing it, but I can tell you, even for us, it's no longer the kids doing their homework. It's the parents doing the homework. I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, she may do the subject matter, but we're spending hours you know, making sure formatting's right, and if this software is not working right, or if it's not jiving, or it's not uploading, or, you know, whatever. We're
Yeah.
emailing teachers saying we tried for an hour and a half and we can't get it to upload, so we're gonna print it. Oh yeah, well, we don't have any ink, so you're gonna have to wait 2 days. I mean, so it's becoming, with deadlines and things like that, I see a real problem
Yeah.
for kids and for parents, because really, we're doing a ton of work, I'm gonna tell you, as parents. It's
I think
ridiculous.
I understand, and I think that this will solve a lot of that. And I'll tell you why. These are not new systems. They've been around a long time. And to show you how fast the market is shifting and changing, you talked about SchoolWires. SchoolWires was purchased by Blackboard. So you've got these teacher webpage tools that are being absorbed by the LMS vendors. And for good reason, because they're absorbing those into their systems. So we call them, you know, Blackboard is buying, Schoology is buying, everyone's buying all these systems, and they're all merging into one. Because it's just like when you put a video up on YouTube or you put a video up on Vimeo, it's agnostic to any device. So if I just put a video up on my website, I may need to download something on my device, or I may need a certain player. These things are kind of great equalizers. They are truly agnostic to whatever device you have. And that's an important piece also for uploading. I have students that are going through the entire class with just their mobile phone. I mean, they don't have a laptop.
Right.
It's hard for me with my old eyes to think, how in the world do you do that? But these students are doing it. And I'll talk a little bit about how we get every kid a device here in a moment as well, because the lending library works very well, and I highly recommend that.
And that's a good point. And maybe it's just something we need to think about from a policy perspective. I mean, if there are kids that are struggling, or from a procedures perspective, I don't know. You know, I'm throwing it out there, because there are always going to be kids that are going to miss that deadline because their technology's not working, or that, you know, mom and dad aren't there to help. So I think it's just something we probably need to keep in mind.
And even no matter with the best technology, you know, I still look at the metrics of when kids hand stuff in, and it's 1 minute before midnight of the due date. So I can't change human nature. That's a tough one.
So
Yes,
I wanted to clarify something there that Kristen mentioned. It looked like on that LMS, you know, teachers wouldn't necessarily have to get rid of their or redo their Weebly websites. It looked like in those lesson plans, they just link them in there, and they're still there. It's in the background. The students won't need to go out and find those. Excuse me. They'll just need to go to that.
technically
LMS.
you're correct. You can link out too. I think it's not a good idea, because when we get into the analytics and the dashboard, what we call the exhaust out of these LMSs is what we're grabbing onto. And so if it's not in that LMS, we can't measure it. And so technically, you're correct, we can link out to anything. I think it's not a good idea because you can't monitor it.
Okay.
The data that's coming out of these LMSs are giving us a tremendous amount of insight into what's going on in kids' learning. I mean, that's why all these things are free, because these other companies are getting that insight. And so I'm saying you should have the insight into your own students and not let these other companies do it.
So then a teacher who's spent years working on a website about a subject, I mean, is that gone out the window now, or can they port it into this thing somehow, or?
So, right now in SchoolWire, we are helping the teachers rebuilding those websites, so that way we're gonna have one uniformed location, as well as a uniform looks and feel for all of the classrooms. And eventually, once the LMS is implemented, then we can start having them built within the LMS. It's more protective than, say, out there in the wild internet, if you will.
And he's right, but every one of these I put in, I said, yes, you start over. Because the video is probably out there anyway somewhere, so you don't have to move it, you just have the embed code. But all the